Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Küstenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our futures. Now, did you know that around 40% of family-owned businesses in Australia are run by couples, often husband and wife teams, and they share not just a home, but also a business? On the surface, this might sound like an ultimate partnership, sharing a vision, building wealth together, celebrating wins side by side. But the reality, it's not always so rosy. Running a business with your partner presents unique challenges, blurring the lines between work and life and home life and financial pressures and role conflicts, sometimes even health and relationships issues. In fact, international research suggests that couples who own businesses together may face higher divorce rates and greater stress than the general population. So how do they make it work? What strategies can help them thrive in their relationships and their business? That's what we're going to unpack today with our guest, Mark Creedon, who's CEO of Metropole, and he's also the host of the Mastermind for Business podcast. Now, for those of you who don't know Mark, as a business coach, he's been coaching some of Australia's leading business people and entrepreneurs. He spent years observing and advising couple-run businesses. So even though he's my business partner today, I'd like to pick his brain about this particular issue. So whether you're in business with your partner or not, doesn't matter. You may just be curious about how demographic trends are going to shape business in the future. I think this conversation is going to be for you. So welcome, Mark.
Hello, gentlemen. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for stopping by today, Mark. So let's start with the context. 70% of businesses, or more or less, are family-owned. Maybe 40% of those are run by couples. Why do so many couples end up going in business together? And is this an opportunity? Is this a necessity? Or is it something different altogether?
I think, Simon, it's all of the above. So often if it's a generational business, it's a necessity thing because it gets passed down from generation to generation. So it might go from mum and dad to son and daughter-in-law, or daughter and son-in-law, or son and son-in-law, as the case may be. So often it's that family situation. I think the other thing is sometimes you'll often see, particularly in trades businesses, what will normally happen is one partner will be the tradesperson, and then the other partner comes in when they start to get a bit overwhelmed with back of office things like handling accounts and appointments and calendars and diaries. And so it's almost by default, they sort of ended up being in partnership with each other. And then sometimes they choose to do it because some of the things we're going to talk about today, which is common values, common purpose, common vision, and that someone they can trust.
And so running this with your partner that you know intimately in and out, what are the strengths that you get when you run a business this way compared to another business partner relationship?
Yeah, well, I mean, as Michael said in the intro, Simon, I've been observing couple-run businesses for a long time, but I'm also in one. Caroline and I have been married for 19 years. We've been business partners for 15 of those, and we kind of fell into it. So, in fact, when Caroline and I first met, she was managing hairdressing salons. She just had enough of that. She'd been doing it since she left school. She'd gone through the apprenticeship and moved into management roles, and she just kind of had enough of that industry. And I needed some help in the back end of my business. I went, well, why don't you just come and work with me? So we've spent 15 years working out why that works. And I think there's a couple of things. I think there's common values. I think there's a shared vision. And I think the other thing, the really big thing is trust, because, if you have a business partner, we would all know business partnerships that have fallen apart, and trust is a big element of that. I think it's so much easier to trust someone who you actually live with and you're married to, or in a long-term relationship as well as a business partnership.
I've been there too, Mark. Of course, Pam and I set up the Metropole that you're now the CEO of 26 years ago. And I know working together can bring people closer together, but it also creates stress at times. So from your perspective, what are some of the common challenges couples in business face?
I think that probably the biggest one we see is kind of blurred lines. So blurred lines in terms of two things. One, in terms of the relationship. So in other words, who does what in the business? And you find it's much easier. So Michael, you and I are in a partnership. We're very clear about what your role is and what my role is. And
most of the time.
Most of the time. But the good thing about that is that if we get to the point where we're not clear on it, you and I can just have an honest conversation. We've had some honest and we've had some heated conversations, but we have the conversation, we push it. It's so much harder to do that with your spouse sometimes. Yes. So I think there's the blurred lines in that regard. The other thing is the blurred lines between home and work. So what happens is you find that if you've got a family, for example, you've got kids or pets or whatever it might be, you go home and suddenly you find yourself spending at the dinner table rather than spending it with the kids, talking about their day. You end up talking about your day at work, the issues you've got with clients, customers, staff, suppliers, whatever it might be. So really blurred lines, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we see, Michael.
Well, blurred lines. Also, then the financial stress. You worry about the income not coming in or the invoices not coming in. And as you say, sometimes the different conflicts of the roles. Do you think these challenges are more about business ownership, or is it just the couple dynamics even before you get into business together?
Oh, that's a good point. I think that what happens is and we've certainly seen couples that work very, very well together as a couple. And then when they move into a business, it doesn't work so well. Again, that comes around sort of role conflict, I think. Whilst there might be a shared values and common values, there may not be a shared vision. And in fact, I can certainly, my first marriage broke up largely because we worked together as well. But I just had a different vision for where I wanted things to go, and she had a different one. Neither was right nor wrong, but it contributed significantly to that sort of ultimate parting of ways because we wanted different things. And I think it's easier to want different things in your personal life and to go and look for those, and you still have a touchstone that you come back to as a couple. Whereas in a business, it's very difficult. And the other thing too in a business is, remember, if you're actually working together, let's say we're talking about a physical business, if you're working together, you're either spending almost every waking moment together, or if one person's, say, in a trades business, one person's out on the road, they're still communicating all the time. So there's this constant communication, and there's kind of never a break from it.
But it actually does work for some businesses. While people know Metropole for our property and wealth creation advice and strategic advice, something that not everyone understands or knows is you started off as my business coach and still with Caroline run Mastermind Business Accelerator. And in that, we actually next week after recording this, not because we're recording this, but we're going up to the intensive on the Gold Coast that we get together. And I'm always just how many couples are there. And I think having an outside coach and having somebody to help guide them makes a difference. But it definitely does work for some people. I'm not going to mention any names. I know they listen to this podcast anyway, but there's quite a lot of couples coming to Mastermind.
Yeah, there is. And the reason it works for them is because we've spent some time helping them to map that out, right? So we've got very clear role definitions. And the other thing is communication. I remember one of the very first couples I worked with, and I said to them, do you guys have a weekly meeting, like a set meeting? And they went, no. We chat about it at the breakfast table. And I sort of finished the sentence with the lunch table and the dinner table and over the hot chocolate before you go to bed. And, so what we did, one of the very first things we did was, right, we're going to have a scheduled weekly meeting. So we treat it like a business that is not being run by a couple, that is being run by a business partnership. And so getting that very clear boundaries set. Wasn't long ago, actually, I was talking to Caroline, went to bed one night, and she asked me a question, and I didn't answer. And she sort of leaned across and went, hey, I've asked you a question. I went, no, it's a work question, so I didn't answer. So sometimes you've got to be quite disciplined about when you work on work and when you work on home.
That was one of the mistakes I made when I first started working with Pam. We'd worked in the office. Well, first of all, we started working at home, and then we moved into an office. And when we moved into the office, when we came home, we still kept working, and those lines were blurred, and it did create stresses. In fact, my first business coach, who before you became my coach, made it very clear to me that exactly the lesson that you've just said. Hey, you've got to actually have boundaries, and home is home, work is work.
Yep, 100%. It's really the only way it can work. But you also have to understand, so you talk about this concept of work-life balance. It's not something that I teach, because saying work-life balance suggests that it's like a set of scales, right? And it sits in some kind of balance. And the truth is it doesn't. One will roll from the other. So sometimes you've got to put 90% of your time into work. Sometimes you've got to put 90% of your time into home. So I like to think of it as work-life harmony. And if we can get them harmonizing and working, even though they might be out of balance or out of kilter for a period of time, there's a harmony once we accept that that's the case and that it is only for a period of time.
This is when you reach all of those discussions about health, just the mental health, the physical stress, the burnout that you can run as a business owner anyways. And then you throw your spouse into the mix.
Yeah.
That's a lot that can go wrong there.
Yeah, there is. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that, Simon. So I think that it's magnified because sometimes you are both experiencing the same burnout. So if you take a couple, for example, that have different jobs, one will come home and have had a bad day. The other one will have had a good day. So the person that's had a good day can listen to the bad day, and we can sort of get a little bit of balance to it. But if you're working together and you've had a bit of a crisis in your business, then you've both had a bad day. So you sort of double the damage or the burnout feeling. The other thing we see is that sometimes one partner takes on more stress in the business in order to protect the other person. Whereas, for example, Michael and if I'm having a bad day, I'll share it with him. And I won't necessarily protect him from it because it's his job as my business partner to carry the same load as me. And that's a vice versa arrangement. Whereas with your partner, with your life partner, you may be more inclined to just actually protect them a little bit and go, well, let me take the brunt of that to help you from it.
Which, if it goes absolutely wrong, can lead to resentment because, like, I've protected you for years, you're not giving me anything back. And that's when we discuss all those fun statistics about when we talk about higher divorce rates amongst couples that are in business together. Do you have any anecdotal or real evidence for these kind of data?
So there was certainly some research done in the US that suggested that the divorce rate among couples in business sits around about 50%, whereas it's somewhere less than that, I think about 40%. I couldn't find anything specifically in Australian data, Simon, but certainly out of the US, it suggests that it's probably at least a 10% margin, higher for couples. And, the other thing I think that happens too is in terms of this stress and burnout and resentment, you're 100% correct around that. Sometimes there's a little bit of resentment around how outsided people see the relationship too, in terms of an imbalance of power between couples in business.
So you got to arrange that's the idea that in a household, you decide, the household chores must be spread evenly, vacuuming, dishwasher, washing machine.
I hope Pam doesn't listen to this.
And so you then have this additional challenge on the home front, and you have it in the office. So it's much easier to potentially feel resentment or feel like you're not being treated fairly.
Well, I think that's an internal and an external process. So internally, you can think you're not being treated fairly because one partner is left with all the dirty jobs, if you like. But then externally, and I know one of the things that frustrates Caroline is if she's referred to as Mark's wife, as opposed to Caroline, a director, an owner, frankly, a damn good accountability coach in her own right. I often say she's got a master's degree in bum kicking. She's much better at keeping people accountable than I am. But for people to go, oh, no, I'll talk to Mark's wife. And so those sorts of things, you build up that little bit of, not resentment as such, but you can sort of look at that and go, well, hang on, why do people see me that way when I make an equal contribution? And of course, that's magnified if you then apply that internally.
And that's it. Then you're right. That's the external story that you have really not all that much control over.
Correct.
You can correct people or so forth, but the idea to then feel hurt or be resentful, you have no control over. That's fair.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you can do in a couple's business is in the material that you put out, the message that you put out to the marketplace is to be really clear. So in Metropole, for example, any message we go out to the marketplace, we know that Michael has a certain role as being undoubtedly the guru in property. We also know that externally, if there's any operational issues, we've got a chief operational officer. Financial issues, we've got a CFO. And we very clearly put that message out. People don't come to me in Metropole for property advice, because my job is to run the business, not to give the advice. People come to people like Michael and Brett and the team for those. So I think you can do, and you should be doing the same thing in a couple-run business as well, is being very clear about the message you put out.
So you need to be very, very disciplined as a takeaway there.
Yeah, 100%.
Also with the staff, the team members, I would have thought Mark as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, Michael. We actually had that example not long ago where one of the teams sort of actually used that. If I can't get to Mark, I'll talk to his wife about it. And Michael, Caroline, you probably imagine how that ended up, but it wasn't well received. But in lots of ways, I look at that and I go, that's my fault, right? That's my fault. I haven't set those boundaries clear enough. I haven't sent that message clear enough. And at the end of the day, if people aren't performing at a certain level or aren't getting a message, for me, the first thing I'd look at and goes, what do I need to do to change that message so that they do?
What about succession planning? Does that have unique challenges in couple-owned businesses?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it becomes complex for a couple of reasons. One of the big reasons is emotion. So in couples-run businesses, you have to think about the emotional aspect. There's an emotional attachment to the brand. There's an emotional attachment to the people. I remember one of my clients once said to me, it's like handing over your firstborn. So it's just got this, because I started it, it's my baby. And Michael, you know that only too well.
Going through that at the moment, 100%
You are.
right.
So it's my baby. I started it. It's got 25 years of my blood, sweat, and tears into it. And now I've got to, and that's difficult enough when there's just one of you, but when there's two of you singing that same song, again, we've kind of doubled the aspect to it. And I think the other thing too, when it's a couple's business, is that sometimes if you've got one partner that says, "Okay, I'm ready to hand something over because I want to do something different," whether it's stop working completely, whether it's work less, whether it's play golf, whatever it might be, or just do less in the business, or focus on the things I really love. But the other person's going, "I'm not ready to let go yet." Then you've magnified the issue. So succession planning, escape arrangements become just that little bit more difficult because of those components, I think.
So that comes to the idea of how much do we plan ahead, obviously. And so what would be your pearls of wisdom, words of advice to a couple that is starting out with their business partnership as well? What do I need to put into place early on?
I think that you've got to look at the business, no matter how big it is, as if it were a larger business. So it's kind of I'll start with the end in mind. So let's just say you're running, say, a trades business, for example, and you've got and it could be either gender, but let's just say you've got the man's the plumber and the partner's doing all of the bookwork. You've actually got to look at what's this business going to look like in 10 years' time, and how do I set that up? So one of the things Michael just mentioned, the intensive we're doing next week, one of the things we're talking about that is, how do you be the CEO of your own business, even if it's just the two of you? So you've got to think in those terms. And if you set that up and you've got those very clear role definitions, you've got communication processes in place and you've actually got them locked in, I think then that's going to make it much easier when it comes time either for delegation or for scaling yourself out or succession planning.
Fair enough.
I could throw something in, Simon and Mark. One of the best lessons I learned many years ago from somebody who I grew up with, a friend who was a financial planner who since retired, said to me when Pam and I were starting our business and having a few of the growth challenges, "Michael, you need a business coach." And I thought, no, I don't. I don't need somebody to tell me how to run the business. Boy, one of the best decisions I made was getting a business coach, just to be in the middle there between Pam and me, because we didn't have many arguments, but actually to guide us along the way. I didn't have to invent the path because he'd already trampled that path with so many other people, Mark.
Yeah, I think that's right, Michael. And if I could just sort of expand on that, coaching is great, mentoring, somebody that can either be that circuit breaker for you or sometimes just that opportunity to see blind spots that you've got. But I think the other thing is, if you can get yourself involved in something that has a group of people that are all doing the same thing, because what we know is that it's actually very lonely in business. And if we go along this theme that if you're a couple in business, you're magnifying whatever the emotion may be, you can actually double the sense of isolation, because it's the two of you against the world. And whilst that's very romantic, that it's just the two of you, on the front of the Titanic, the difficulty is, if it is just the two of you, it becomes even more lonely and more isolating. And I don't know about you, gents, but I know that for many, many years, a couple of my brothers who were never in their own business used to say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky in your own business. You can take holidays whenever you want and you can pay yourself whatever you want." And I'm sitting there looking at, well, I'm not sure what business they think that I'm in, but it's certainly not the one I am in.
No. And we know this. There's plenty of data out there that the one thing that you do when you own your own business, be this a BHP or a charcoal chicken shop, is that you work extremely long hours.
Yeah.
And you pour your heart and soul in it. Nobody works longer hours than the business owners. Just statistically speaking, we have the data for this. Brings obvious challenges. Do you have any kind of case studies or anecdotes to share where, it
So
has
before
been
you
super
ask that of Mark, if I could please say, Simon, that we recently did an episode of Demographics Decoded about business owners and baby boomers who actually staying in business longer than the average employee. So if you're listening to this or watching this and you're finding it interesting, whether you're in business yourself, your kids are, your parents are, or somebody who is, please go back to wherever you're listening to this show and have a look at that episode about baby boomers retiring, because they hang on a lot longer than the average employee, don't they, Mark?
Yeah, they do. They do. And one of the reasons for that is just this common purpose, right? It's, if I've got to work long hours and I've got my life partner at home, wondering where I am, having to take all of the burdens of being at home, And that's when conflict can quite genuinely and reasonably arise. But if we are actually in this together, and then you'll find that couples who are business owners are very happy to work those long hours, and particularly if they can get this harmony going right, where they know what each of them is doing, they've got very clear roles around that, and they've also got a clear delineation or definition as to what happens at home as well. Then they're much happier to work longer hours in the business, and because they're getting this joint reward from it, which isn't always just the money. Obviously, it's the growing of the asset, but it's also just the sense of satisfaction that they're getting out of having the ability to work together in business.
So that then makes the succession planning even harder, though, because you build all of these things. Letting go of a business is famously difficult because at the moment there's so many baby boomer business owners that have businesses to sell. Who are the buyers? It's very hard to finance the purchase of a new business for a 30 something year old who doesn't have any kind of property wealth to back their purchase of a business. So the challenge of then just hanging on for dear life because you can't sell it, that must be even more of a source of conflict there.
Yeah, and I can actually give you a real world example of that. So we worked with a client who was a husband in a service and retail business, and the advice that we gave them was, because they had a number of staff, was to start identifying people within their business that they could start to bring up into that management role, and then ultimately into an ownership role, and to start to offer, whether it's a vendor finance, whether it's a sweat equity arrangement, but to actually start to give them that opportunity to be able to take the business on. And they resisted that. And they've now, I was actually chatting to one of them the other day, they've now reached the point where they've had the business on the market, they can't sell it, and they will probably let that business go, if not just close it down, when it has enormous goodwill. But for the very reason they've now built it to that point where it's almost impossible for someone else to buy it. Had they 6-7 years ago, when we first put this concept to them, started to build those people, and we actually helped them identify a couple of people that could do that, and they'd started to do sweat equities and swaps, the people, as the management people, as they came out, would have found it much easier to go and get finance because they already owned a percentage of the business. They've been in the business for that period of time, and so it's an easier path for them. So again, that's why that planning is so vitally important, Simon.
So when do we need to start with this? Like, how many years out of retirement out of your idea of retirement, your ideal retirement day, do you need to look at this?
Yeah, well, I think it depends where you are. Like, obviously, if somebody's listening to this and they're going, well, I was really hoping to retire in 2 years' time, my answer is it's not that's okay. We can probably put something together in that period of time. Is that going to be as good as something that we planned 5 or 6 years ago, which to me would be the ideal arrangement? No. But it's still better than coming and going, look, I'd really like to retire tomorrow, and now I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and put this on the market. And for all the reasons you said, it's harder to get finance for it. It's harder to find somebody to buy it. So what often happens, I've seen really good businesses close their door when they really shouldn't have. They really should have been able to sell their business. And I just think that's a great shame, all that work that's gone in.
And that problem should get much, much bigger now that baby boomers are
Yep.
retiring their businesses. So anyone who's listening in the baby boomer cohort, retire in 5 years and set yourself up now.
Start planning it now. Because if you start planning it now with the things that we've spoken about, getting really clear roles, searching around, and then delegating to the right people, that's also a little bit of an issue. People often struggle with delegating because they're just so used to only delegating between the two of them and trusting each other. But if we get the processes in place, we can generally get them there.
Now, I know a lot of people listening to this podcast, watching it on YouTube, are business owners, entrepreneurs, or want to get in business. So my suggestion is, if you've actually found, Mark, I want to ask you a couple more questions, but I just thought I should give a shameless plug for your Mastermind for Business podcast, because if you've seen the depth of experience that Mark's bringing to our discussion today, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, the Apple, Spotify, YouTube, go to Mastermind for Business. I'll leave a link in the show note so you can get Mark's wisdom once a week. But interestingly, that I just realized is a family-run podcast as well,
Correct.
because you have your son Nick on it a lot and
Yep.
your wife Caroline. So yours is actually a multi-generational business.
Yeah, 100%. So, to use that term, we eat our own cooking, right? So what we're teaching is not theory. It's not out of a book. I didn't learn it in an MBA. It's actually real hands-on experience. I think there's two other things that we can really look at if there are couples now listening to this podcast thinking, right, I'm suffering from a bunch of those things, and that is you've got to, we often say you've got to fit your own oxygen mask first before helping others. You've got to look after yourself. So self-care I think is just vitally important. You've got to look after your health, make sure you're taking care of yourself. And the other thing is interests for each of you outside of what you do together.
Yes.
Really
You've got to
important.
have your own interests as well. Pam has been to Mahjong today. I play bridge. I've got my magic as a hobby as well. You've got to do some of your own things, don't you?
Yeah, you do. I mean, Caroline loves painting, so she goes off and paints. I like to play music. Well, it's drumming, so it's not really music. And so, I love to go and sit in my music room, and I'll sit in there for hours just drumming away or trying to make something sound reasonably decent. But it's a really important thing because that's an opportunity. Whilst you're doing all of these things together, it's something you can actually pursue, and even to the point of having your own circle of friends that you hang out with separate from your business.
Yeah. Statistically speaking, bigger issue for men than women is the idea to retain your circle of friends. Quite often, men put a lot of their persona into their work persona. And then once the work persona falls away in retirement, men fall in a deep hole because there's no one left there. And you just have the friends that your partner produces for you. But it's something different than your own true friendship. So particularly to the men out there, based on data, remain or retain at least a couple of your friendships.
I think that's great advice. Obviously, it's data-backed advice, but you're right. I mean, if I look at all the people I know who have retired over the years, their friendship circle just crumbles away because, in fact, their friendship circle was based around work, and in lots of cases, it was such a work friendship that there's really little common interest once that work relationship finishes. And so, I think that's fantastic advice.
Now, Mark, you've talked about broader business network, masterminding as a protective factor. Now, I know you've got a vested interest because you run Mastermind Business Accelerator. By the way, I'll leave a link in the show notes to that so people can actually speak to Caroline, that you've mentioned 4 or 5 times, and see if your Mastermind for Business Accelerator program would be of benefit for them. But maybe you could, as I said, you've got a vested interest, explain why such external support is so important for family-run businesses.
Yeah, we tapped into, and Simon mentioned there's lots of data around there around the sense of loneliness that comes about being in business, and the fact that if you don't have a circle of contacts and friends that are in business, they won't really understand. So one of the things that we like about having a mastermind group rather than just a one-on-one coach, and I've done one-on-one coaching in the past, but the reason we have a mastermind group is kind of 2 things, Michael. There's this collective momentum because everybody in the group is in the same. They might be at a different stage in their business life, but they're basically in the same position, which means they're going through or have gone through the same concerns, hurdles, hassles that you're going through now. And so there's this collective momentum. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. Everybody gets it. So we often say in Mastermind, people come for the content but stay for the community. So, but in addition to collective momentum, there's the shared wisdom. So, when I'm in that room, we're talking about doing the intensives. I'm not the smartest person in that room by a long way. There's some very, very clever people in there that have done amazing things, and they know areas about life and business better on some areas than I do. So if you can get yourself into a group, and not a networking group, because a networking group is just about trying to get work. So you're going and handing out cards to each other and trying to get as much work as you can. This is actually a support group. I mean, it's not about holding hands and singing Kumbaya. It's a genuine support group for people in business because there's a common understanding.
Now, Simon, each week we have a little mention about what you and the demographics group does. And while I know that you advise organizations, institutions, even government authorities, how much work do you do with small businesses?
Well, it's more small business organizations. Usually small businesses are not the ones who pay for consulting, who pay for big presentations, but I'm in front of a lot of small businesses at those industry and umbrella type organizations. And that's where you hear lots and lots of great stories from people afterwards. And super switched on folks, obviously, around small businesses who some of them want to scale, some of them don't want to scale. I every now and then hear those relationship challenges being brought up as well. I hear more of intergenerational conflict though, because I talk so much about the generational data. And so much more often I hear the older business owners complain about their kids who are meant to take over and are seen as more or less capable by their parents.
The interesting thing about that, Simon, though, is all of the principles we've spoken about today, whilst we've spoken about couples, I've applied those principles in intergenerational business as well. So again, solid communication lines, very clear delineation, roles and responsibilities, the communication processes down to the team, effective delegation, and also making sure that there's a clear line between work and home. So if it's, mother and son or mother and daughter, whatever it may be, knowing that every time there's a family barbecue once a month, there's not going to be a big blue about what happened at work during the week, right? That they're going to actually be able to make that distinction and that delineation between the two.
And so it might even be harder because as a partner, you're meant to be 50-50 in your relationship. And so you're probably meant to be sort of 50-50 in your work as well. So these are always on eye level. Whereas a parental generational story is you are as a child, even if you are a grown adult, you are the child, your parent is the parent. And quite often you start as the child in the business, but you're meant to take over. So you're meant to flip the roles, but that obviously can create a bit of tension where you give up your position of power as the old patriarch or whatever you are, and then you hand it over to your daughter, to your son, and you have to then step away and make a flip and be the subordinate in this business, which is just a mental shift that takes a lot of processing, I guess.
Yeah, it does. In some ways, though, there's a flip side to that is that people who are looking to hand their business over to non-family members have almost the same issues because invariably it's a younger person that's coming in. So whilst there might not be this patriarchal relationship, there is a patriarchal or a matriarchal in terms of they are the patriarch or the matriarch of the business. And in some ways, if we get it right, we can turn that relationship into an advantage rather than a disadvantage by going, well, hang on a second. If you're passing this down to the next level, whilst there's still this child-parent relationship, there's also an enormous amount of trust and knowledge that goes on there that may not be present if it's a boss and an incoming purchaser or an employee relationship.
In previous episodes of Demographics Decoded, we've discussed, Simon, about how different generational groups, different demographic age groups look at life, at businesses, communication differently as well. By the way, I'd suggest to people who are watching this or listening to this, go back to those shows that we ran at the beginning of this year, 2025, and have a look at how each of the different generational groups interacts with each other and with the outside world as well. But that would also add to this conflict and this confusion, wouldn't it, Simon?
It's just one more layer. So whenever you have a age hierarchy in there, you have different generational values communicating with each other. What you shouldn't have usually in a family is the intercultural thing. So you sometimes have this as well. Let's assume you hand the business over to somebody from a different cultural background. So they are different cultural background. They're younger. So there's all those dynamics that happen at the same time. And you as a poor mortal soul who need to operate with this big complexity in there. So it hits us quite hard sometimes. And there's endless opportunities for misunderstandings in those communications.
This has been a fantastic conversation because even though we speak every day anyway, I don't think we've ever discussed the concept personally about the challenges of being in business with your life partner. And I guess what's been clear to me listening to you is that couple-run businesses are really a vital part of Australia's economic and social fabric. They bring unique strengths, resilience, adaptability, shared vision, but clearly they also face challenges that I guess can't be ignored.
No,
so
100%.
Yes, you've explained about role clarity, external support networks, all that. So to our listeners, whether you're running a business with your partner or just curious about how demographics intersects with entrepreneurships, I hope that our chat with Mark today has given you some fresh insights. If you don't currently subscribe to this show, whatever podcast app or video app you're watching this on, please click the subscribe and the button, a follow button. They say different things in different apps so that once a week you get the information from Simon and myself and our occasional guests. Oh, by the way, don't forget to subscribe to Mark's Mastermind for Business podcast, wherever you're listening to this as well. I'll leave a link for that in the show notes. And as I said, why not have a chat with Mark's wife, Caroline, to see how Mark's Mastermind Business Accelerator and Caroline's Mastermind Business Accelerator, almost got into trouble, Mark, could help you grow your business. I mean, I know the theme behind it because you've been my business coach for years is to work less, enjoy your family life more, but still make good money. So again, I'll leave a link in the show notes. And remember, success in business doesn't have to come at the expense of your relationship or your health. With the right structures and support, couples really can have the best of both worlds, can't they, Mark?
Yeah, they absolutely can, Michael. It's been a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you so much for allowing me to drop by.
Yeah, thank you for rocking up. Thank you.
Look forward to catching up with you again next week, Simon.